When it comes to the sagebrush biome, we can't just do conservation. We need to be strategic about where and when and how we invest our resources, because we can't do conservation everywhere. The problems are too widespread. They occupy multiple spatial, temporal scales. They cross different jurisdictions. And so when we're talking about conservation readiness, what we're referring to is places where strategic conservation is currently or might become possible. When we talk about conservation readiness, it's what makes strategic action on the ground possible. And so really what comes into play is, are we working in areas of ecological importance? And so thinking about the core sagebrush areas identified in the sagebrush conservation design, those growth opportunity areas as well. And then secondly, do we have the authority to work in those places? And so if you look at an ownership map, this is the most obvious thing in the world, but a federal land management agency cannot necessarily implement management activities on private land or on state lands. And likewise, a private landowner cannot implement conservation or do treatments on federal land. And so thinking about how those different rules are dispersed on a landscape is important when we talk about administrative conditions. A second piece of administrative conditions are also resources for those people to act. And so we refer to those as tools that complement those rules I just mentioned. And so those might be funding programs, and so the Natural Resource Conservation Service does a lot of funding for private landowner conservation, and then we think about the federal land management agencies. What resources do they have to implement treatments or conservation on the ground? Another aspect of resources is also just humans and expertise in an area, and so that really relates to the third component, which is social capacity. And so not only do we have those resources, that knowledge, but are we able to coordinate those different actors on those landscapes across those different jurisdictions that I just mentioned? If one or two of those components of conservation readiness are missing, we need to shift our attention from doing projects on the ground, treating fuels, cutting juniper, to work that particularly tends to those other two components. And so that might be, what we do as a group at this point to make a place conservation ready might be build relationships so that we build that social capacity so that we can start to do projects on the ground together.